Greetings, listeners with good taste, and welcome to Selected Shorts Too Hot for Radio, the podcast for great literature that also happens to feature sex, drugs, and every other fun thing your grandma freaks out about when imagining your personal life. I'm your host, Aparna Nancharla, and I'm here to introduce these stories that may be a bit much for the public radio audience, which, yes, may include Gram. Before we begin, let's take a quick stroll down memory lane. You know, that street at the intersection of Bad Experience Circle, just off Emotionally Scarring Drive? Let's mosey on back to the time before adulthood, before college, before even the summer before you go to college. Yes, it's high school, and more specifically, your prom. Ah, prom, one of those nights that you remember for the rest of your life. Here's what I remember about mine. Nothing. I didn't go. Or maybe I did, but it was so forgettable I choose to not remember it. That's my right. Dancing and social obligations, even Jane Austen would be like, "We're still doing this? What about a puppet show under my duvet cover instead?" And yes, I realize that sounds like a euphemism, but in this case, I mean literally. Or hey, how about a cooking competition featuring 6 different kinds of boxed brownies? But the forced kind where someone says, "Hey you, make something perfect, or you failed." Anywho, so my prom, who cares? But I've seen enough movies and TV shows, so let me paint the scene for you. There's taffeta, there's balloons, there's a punch bowl which someone has spiked or is about to spike or might spill down someone's back. There's laughing, there's tears, limos, corsages, and even pig's blood sometimes. But mostly disappointed, awkward, and sad people whose love objects are across the room making out with someone else. On the bright side, they will all grow up to become very successful sitcom writers. Great! Now that we're all at the prom, I think we're ready to hear today's story by Rabih Alameddine. It was one of the pieces commissioned by Selected Shorts for its new anthology, Small Odysseys. Alameddine is the author of titles including An Unnecessary Woman and The Wrong End of the Telescope. He's a writer who boasts an incredible number of influences, even just considering that he was born in Jordan and raised in Lebanon and Kuwait. And his open cosmology is definitely something you feel in this story. You'll learn much more about Rabih, being a professional grump, and writing about sex in a conversation with one of our producers, Matthew Love, just after the reading. But before we hear it, here's our standard content warning. Warning. This story hits all the warning buttons: sex, drugs, and terrorism. Our actor, Raffi Barsoumian, plays plenty of comic book villains and witches. For example, in DC's Legends of Tomorrow and The Vampire Diaries. But like the narrator in the story, Barsoumian is not the bad guy. It's just how people want to cast him. You'll see what I mean. Now here is The Prom Terrorists by Rabih Alameddine, read by Raffi Barsoumian.
No matter what my baby sister says, I don't want you to think I'm stupid. But no one seems to think that maybe the FBI is stupid. Or that maybe it wasn't my fault, but my parents, since they suddenly decided that I needed to find a job and move out because only losers still live with their parents at 28. And that was when I said that they meant slacker and not loser. But they didn't know what slacker meant since English is their second language. And I said that if we were back in the old country, which is something they always said, I would be living at home until I got married, at which point they'd have to buy a house for my wife and me. But we were in the hellhole known as Fresno, which was better than the shithole where they were born, but not by much, if you ask me. So, I was feeling stressed when the FBI letter arrived with my name on it, telling me they were looking for someone with my language skills to help fight extremism and terrorism at home. And I didn't stop to think what language they were talking about, since I'm a rapper and use language all the time. But they thought I spoke Arabic because of my name, Kareem Lotfi Al-Manfaludi. Even though I make sure everyone calls me Lot, and I only know a few curse words in my parents' motherfucking tongue. So, during the interview, when the intimidating FBI officer with the Stalin mustache asked me if I spoke Arabic, I panicked and said, "Fuck yeah." which turned out to be the perfect answer. But then he put me in a room and handed me a test with the loopy as shit script, which looked Greek to me. But it was multiple choice. And next to me sat this dark-skinned hijabi woman, probably an Emirati, and I copied all her answers. Which really wasn't my fault, because she didn't cover her responses. And I had popped an edible before the interview. Pineapple, 20 milligrams THC, that hit me as soon as I sat down for the test. So don't blame me for the cheating. But then everybody knows they weren't going to hire a dark-skinned woman in a hijab, so I was doing her a favor. And I got the job. Not that it was a great job or anything, since they wouldn't give me a gun. Like, what kind of an FBI agent has no gun? And that was when I was told I was no FBI agent, just someone who worked with the Bureau. And that's when I wondered who said things like bureau, and whether informant was just a fancy word for secretary. But then I was told to infiltrate the Muslims at the city's mosque and find out what the recently arrived imam was planning, because they knew that he was kicked out of his mosque in Cairo before coming to Fresno, and they were sure he was planning something untoward. But I couldn't make myself ask the intimidating FBI agent, untoward what? And that was when he said that even though I looked white with my bleached hair, I would fit in with the other terrorists. And yes, I know. That might have been the time when I should have said that my family was Christian. But I thought telling him that might make him think I was a liar, so I decided to not ask, but continued whistling an Kulthum song so I'd sound authentic. And that was when it occurred to me that I needed help. So I went to my baby sister, who was 12 years younger but was the smartest person I know, and asked her if she would come to the mosque with me since, unlike me, she'd paid attention during the Arabic lessons my parents paid for. And she thought I was crazy, as in, why would she want to go to a mosque since she was a diehard atheist feminist who thought all religions were nothing more than a tool to prop up the patriarchy, so no fucking way would she set foot in a mosque or a church, and she wasn't going to ruin her hair by covering it. But I think that the reason she didn't want to help me was because she was upset, because some guy called Adam, who she'd planned on having sex with at the prom, told her he was gay, and she had to say yes to Steve, who asked, and all her plans of offering her virginity to Adam had to be changed to Steve, and she wasn't happy. Which means I didn't blame her for telling me to fuck off and calling me a fascist stooge. And I ended up in the mosque inside the mall to check things out. And a nice guy in a funny yarmulke told me I needed to take my shoes off, even though the carpet was as old as the Prophet himself. And he knew it was my first time, and we began to gossip. And I didn't have to ask before he told me that the imam was kicked out of Cairo because his wife had walked in on him masturbating in the bathroom to pictures in Teen Vogue, and she divorced him and tossed him out of that shithole country. I mean, really. All that trouble because he masturbated. But my new friend said that the new imam railed constantly against the low morals of our country, and that the week before, he issued a fatwa against the high school prom because everyone knew it was where young Muslim girls lost their virginity. And I had to tell my new friend that it wasn't just Muslim girls, and that my sister was tired of hers and intended to fling it with any halfway decent guy who wanted it. And I think he was a bit confused because his head tilted funny. But he went with the flow, which was a good thing because I was really high by then. And my new friend told me that all the Muslims laughed at the anti-prom fatwa. And that meant that as soon as the imam sat cross-legged in front of us on the short dais, he began to talk about sending undercover Muslim men to the prom in order to guard the virginity of young Muslim girls. And that was when I realized that I understood what the imam was saying, since he was saying it in English. A fucked up broken English, just like my dad, and I definitely had the language skill for that. But the intimidating FBI agent didn't believe me at first when I told him about undercover Muslims at the prom. But he changed his tune when the agents following the imam called to tell him that the imam came out of the tuxedo rental shop with a baby blue number. So, the Fresno FBI went into an insane frenzy because the prom was only 3 days away. And I knew that because my baby sister had stolen all the condoms I had hidden under the mattress. And When I tried to confront her, she said, "Fuck off, you imperialist tool." And to get back at her, I laced her Diet Coke with K, but then thought, what a waste, and drank it myself. But it wasn't my fault that her plans for the prom blew up because 11 undercover FBI agents went to the school gym, including a hostage negotiator and a diffuser. Although why they would want to diffuse potpourri in a large gym is beyond me. And they were joined by the imam and another Muslim guy, even though they were supposed to be 5, but the other 3 had eaten burritos at Taco Bell and became indisposed. And the poor girl at the entrance couldn't stop any of them from going in. And the FBI thought they would have it easy, since there was only 2 undercover Muslims. But once in the gym, they saw all these Muslim kids dancing and drinking and making out in corners with each other and with non-Muslim kids. The intermingling kissing offending both the undercover FBI agents and the undercover Muslim. And then my sister saw me, punched me in the shoulder, demanding to know what I was doing at the prom. But before I could tell her that I was with the FBI, she dragged me under the bleachers, where we were shocked to see Adam, daisy-chained between Muhammad A and Muhammad K, their pants around their ankles. And I envied homosexuals for being able to go from making out to full-fledged fucking in less than 6 seconds. And while pulling their pants up, Adam, Muhammad A, and Muhammad K asked us not to judge because they were in love and wanted to move in together and live as a throuple when they graduated in a couple of years. And I said, cool. But they didn't pull up their pants fast enough because the imam, looking kind of not bad in a baby blue tux, showed up out of nowhere next to us under the bleachers and began to yell at both Muhammads. Then he called my baby sister a slut because he assumed they were making out with her. And that was when she slugged him. And he staggered back and fell in front of the entire prom and was out cold. A baby blue lake on the hardwood floor. And my baby sister came out from under the bleachers, still yelling at the unconscious imam, and there was a big brouhaha, and the undercover FBI went into action, trying to intimidate anyone into confessing whether there was a bomb or not. And the police got involved, and so many people were taken to the station, and I don't have to tell you the rest because you must have read about the weapons of prom destruction jokes online. And the FBI tried and failed to hush things up, and my baby sister is still so angry because everyone at school thought she was doing sinful things under the bleachers, and all she wanted was to get fucking laid, and I ruined everything for her. And I didn't even get the $50 the FBI promised me.
That was Raffi Barsoumian reading The Prom Terrorist by Rabih Alameddine. One of our producers, Matthew Love, sat down for a conversation with Rabih. Over to you, Matt.
Rabih, hello. Welcome to Too Hot for Radio. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know that I'm not allowed to play favorites, but I will say when I read this story in the collection for Small Odysseys, it delighted me so much. It was such a thrill, and it's so fun to hear it on stage. And I feel like the story like so quickly gets into hijinks, but the sort of the impetus of it, the sense of like this FBI probe into, you know, potential terrorists at a prom, it feels like a only slightly exaggerated real post 9/11 American fear. I was wondering, like, what was the germ of the story for you?
Post 9/11 American fear. And also, let's go back. You are allowed to, you know, pick favorites as long as it's me. So that as long as we get that straight, you're absolutely fine with favorites. I mean, the first time I started thinking about the story was in about 2001, a long time ago. And this friend of mine who wanted to, you know, make a movie together, we never ended up doing it. So we started throwing out ideas, and, you know, this thing came to the surface. Is like, why don't we have a movie where because the letter that was sent from the FBI was real. You know, that a lot of Arabs with Arab sounding names received letters from the FBI asking them if they would like to test them to see if they'd be available to translate. And the funny thing is that, apparently at that time it was a job at the FBI, except that our guy can hold the job. So the whole thing was, what would happen if, an American got that letter? It's like, this is the trouble. I think that for a lot of us is the separation of, if you're an Arab, you can't be an American, and if you're American, you can't be an Arab. And and what if it? I mean, I kept thinking, what if it true, like, barely an American who, of course, no American speaks another language. So what if an American gets this letter? But for me, the real sort of thing that made the story for me was the sister. So it was the what happens. Someone is between two cultures and is trying to adapt, basically.
Yes, and that need to get laid right at the end of
senior year. It is like the most important need. I mean,
universal. It's universal.
Who are we kidding?
Now, the piece was a commission for Selected Shorts for this, so you knew that it was going to be performed aloud. How much did you think about it as a monologue?
Oh, it totally was. I mean, it was commissioned and stuff, but like I said, part of it was that I saw it being performed. When I started thinking about the story, it was supposed, in my mind at first, it was a screenplay. So for me, the whole idea of that it is going to be performed was there. And then, when I got the email asking if I would do this, it was like right away, yes, because I have a story in mind. And it was written as a monologue. Now again, the way that it was written and how it was performed, I always wondered how somebody would perform this, because really it's all one sentence, just one guy who doesn't stop, but you can't really perform that. And I thought Raffi did an amazing job. Amazing.
Yeah, it's such a great stream of consciousness. And now that you tell me that it was meant to be a movie, how jam-packed it is now makes complete sense to me. Mm-hmm. There's so much going on in the story in terms of like the subjects that you cover.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering, I thought, given that we're talking about youth and sex and politics and religion and education and the government's all in this, 7 pages. And I was trying to imagine, like, could it take any other form other than a satire?
No, it is a satire. I mean, it's the trouble is that most of us, particularly here in the West, think of satire as being unserious, whereas in most, particularly in under oppressive regimes, whether it's Eastern European or Middle Eastern, satire is one of the main ways of expressing really serious thoughts, because you can get away with it. So for me, it is a satire. I mean, it's a very, very serious subject, but it is satire. And I love that, I mean, again, I love the idea of how stereotypes work. And if I came to give you a serious, like, sort of story about how stereotypes work and how we, put people into pigeonholes and can't see beyond that. And it would be interesting, but really boring. Again, in my head, I keep thinking of, like the poor girl, all she wants is to get laid, and to think of, it's like, how do we see young girls? How do we see the Muslim cleric? Why do we see that all Arabs are Muslims? Or that, Muslim clerics have to be terrorists. They could be totally insane and not be terrorists.
And yeah, exactly. It might show up in a powder blue tux at a prom.
Exactly.
You do love the first person monologue as a form in both like short stories and novels. What is it about that focused perspective that calls to you so much?
Well, it's partly it's easy, as in it's easier for me because one of the ways that I work is that I actually sort of inhabit a character, and I always say that I inhabit a character, but at the same time I see the character right next to me, so it's separate from me. it makes things easy for me because I experiment in many different ways. Having first person will always limit my point of view to that person. And that to me is a constriction or a constraint that I like. Otherwise, I mean, like we said, the story goes all over the place. But if it was, for me, I feel if it was in third person, the who's talking and why and how is it being seen becomes overwhelming when there's so many things happening. When it's a first person, you could have everything happening, and since it's from one point of view, it's actually in my mind, in the way that I write, it becomes more believable if it's happening. If a guy is drugged out of his mind, is so high, then how he sees the world becomes really believable.
And if you were trying to account for all the different angles of what everybody else saw, and given how much is packed in there, it would like, this is barely controlled chaos.
Exactly. I mean, the narrator controls the chaos, but also what is always in the back of my head is that the narrator has to be, how shall I put it, mildly interesting. So that when he sees the throuple under the bleachers, he has some interesting things to say.
Right? May I just say the beauty, you're on Too Hot for Radio. For us, this is just like chef's kiss to imagine two Mohammeds and an Adam. If you're going for religious, like sacrilegious beauty, I give it up to you for that, just that image alone.
The daisy chain with Adam in the middle.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. And look, it's really cross pollination daisy chain.
But hey, don't judge, because it's a romantic. They're going to.
That's right. That's right. It's about union. It's not.
Exactly.
This is a beautiful beginning of what happens. At prom.
Yeah.
I feel like you are also very fearless about the people that you channel when you write your works, whether they're small or large. Has there ever been a point at which you found a voice, or you were called to a voice and you were scared? You were like, I can't inhabit that voice. I shouldn't inhabit that voice.
Many times, and most of the time, I turned out to be true. Many voices that I've tried and just did not work out. And before I tried, I always thought, no, this was not going to work out. And it turned out to be true. Sometimes I think I can't, and it turns out to be right. Like, for my novel, An Unnecessary Woman, I thought there is no way at one point that I would be able to do a 72-year-old woman. But that actually lasted for about 5 minutes. And then it's like, no, I can do it. It's also me. Again, luckily, I belong to many different outsider groups, whether it's being gay or being an Arab, or even in Lebanon itself, I'm a Druze, which is a minority religion. I'm outside, always outside. So it is easier for me to inhabit characters that don't fit in. It would be difficult for me to inhabit characters that are part of the dominant culture. Like it would be really, really difficult for me. I could try, and I've tried to do, for example, a New York merger and acquisition person. I cannot, it's difficult for me to imagine what it's like to belong, to be successful in dominant culture terms. My characters tend to be weirdos. So that's one of the ways that I judge whether I can inhabit a character or not. One day I would like to do a character that, is the handsomest boy in class, or, a great athlete, or, like people who belong. I don't know what it's like. It's like, popularity was never my thing, so I wouldn't.
I really enjoyed your essay. You talked a little about being an outsider, in the sense of, all of these groups that you could identify as when you're like, and you're making this list of gay, Lebanese, atheists, like all of these things, Arab, like you could identify, but more than these things, you identify as a grumpy writer. which I really enjoyed. What is it about grumpiness that you think is like that is the thing that most connects you?
So do you want the jokey aspect of it or the real aspect of it?
I'd be curious about both, honestly.
Well, the jokey aspect is, grumpy allows me to have more people in my group and not talk to them. It's like it's an ability to be inclusive, but then hate everybody that you're including, which is more my thing. Because even though I belong to many groups, I actually never really belong to any one of them. So the grumpy idea was that I could belong to a group, but within that group, I'm allowed to be separate. And to me, that is the this is how I live. Unfortunately, it's like I don't know really how to belong. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day that I have been in relationships. They might not think they were, but I was in relationship with them. But I never in my life used the word we to describe the relationship. I never belonged in those relationships. I never belonged. It's a fascinating thing. So that, yes, it is, I am an outsider, but even among outsiders, whether it is true or not, I feel like an outsider. So grumpy for me, like I said, I keep imagining instead of having a gay parade, having a grumpy parade where we all walk and nobody looks at the other. It's like,
and nobody claps on the sidelines.
Absolutely not. But that it is, we belong together. Because again, part of the trouble with, I think I mentioned that in that essay, is that once once you're part of a group and you're outside of the dominant culture, at some point you will be included in the dominant culture. And when you do, then you become part of that dominant culture and you belong, and you will then begin to exclude everybody else who does not belong to that dominant culture. So I have noticed as an example that I've been gay all my life, and then all of a sudden gay became cool and I still was not cool. So part of me, like I said, goes, well, what happened? And that's because like I said, I'm out and I'm an outsider. So I decided I'm grumpy. I reject them too before they
Well, I think that push and pull is very interesting now, especially at least in regard to the literary world, because you've just won the PEN Faulkner.
True.
Wrong into the telescope. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
So does that change your that push and pull equation in terms of like acceptance in the literary world?
Well, yeah. Yes. In reality, yes, it does. Personally, it doesn't. This is what I mean. It's not about reality. I'm an outsider, not necessarily because people exclude me, although they do. It's because I feel that they do, which is a different thing. And it's funny, like, I always said it that when I think I won like a Guggenheim, God, early on, and I went into depression for 2 years because, my reason for writing is that everybody doesn't like me and I'm going to show them what it's like, so that when I got approval, it was like, what the happened? How did that happen? So luckily, I have won a number of awards, and it, for a month or so, sometimes for 3 weeks, sometimes for 4 weeks, I feel really good. And I feel that, oh, I'm part of this thing, and then I'm back to like nobody likes me, and I'm the weirdo. And like I said, I have been in psychotherapy for years, so I do know the pattern. I do see it. It just doesn't mean that I can ignore it.
Now, finally, let's end talking about sex, which is why not everyone's favorite subject. But you have so much fun. It seems you have so much fun writing about sex, and I want to know, like, how do you communicate what's fun and silly about sex so well in your writing?
If you don't see sex as fun and silly, you're having the wrong kind of sex. Seriously, it's like, have you ever stopped and looked at yourself while you're having sex? God, it's the most embarrassing thing. And it is truly amazing and lovely and just absolutely silly. I mean, I've always wanted to do this sort of anthology, having, writers and non-writers talk about the silliest thing they had to do either while having sex or to get sex. And I think that would be so eye-opening, to have like some famous person tell you, oh, I lost my underwear in the toilet and then I couldn't come out. It's like we do this all the time when we're having sex to get ready for sex, to have sex, to is one the most fun and the most stupid. It's lovely. And the whole idea, I think, for me, why I love sex is that it is, I mean, I should say why I used to love sex, not that I'm having sex anymore. Remember, outsider, is that you lose yourself. You lose yourself when you're having sex. And there is nothing greater than losing oneself when you're not thinking about anything. Again, just why not, next time you're having sex, have a mirror and, just look at your facial expressions. If that doesn't make you laugh, I don't know what would.
And on that note, I think that is the best way to end. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabih, for doing this. This was such a delight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for, putting the story up.
That was our producer, Matthew Love, talking to Rabih Alameddine. You might say we're at the happy ending of today's program. I hope this little stroll down memory lane didn't land you in the cul-de-sac of smashed expectations or the dead end of infinite adolescent regrets. But if so, I say PYOP. Plan your own prom. Sure, you're an adult now. You retired the corsage long ago. You haven't touched pig's blood for years. But you're alive, damn it. There's still time. PYOP, YOLO, and you tell Gram Gram she can MYOB. Our show is produced by Jennifer Brennan and Mary Shimkin. Our podcast producer and editor is Colleen Pellissier. Matthew Love is our consulting producer. This episode was recorded by Miles B. Smith at Symphony Space in New York City. Our theme song is by Poddington Bear. I'm Aparna Nancherla. Thanks for joining us for Selected Shorts, Too Hot for Radio.